When a hostess's playful teasing turns into a death sentence, she discovers the tattooed man she laughed with for 6 months isn't just dangerous. He owns Chicago's entire underworld. Vivian Clark thought harmless banter with a generous regular was just part of the job. She was wrong. The moment Alessandro Moretti's enemies learned he smiled for her, and only her, they burned her world to ashes. Now, with a bounty on her head, her portfolio of paintings reduced to cinders, and nowhere left to run, Vivian faces an impossible choice: disappear into the city that forgot her, or stand beside the most feared man in Chicago and survive the war she accidentally started. If you want to see how far love can go when it's forged in fire, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Welcome to Roses and Revolvers, where every story leaves a scar. If stories like this keep you on the edge of your seat, hit subscribe and comment where you are watching from, because the next one might be even darker. The dinner rush at Moretti's on Michigan Avenue had a rhythm Vivian Clark knew by heart. The dinner rush at Moretti's on Michigan Avenue had a rhythm Vivian Clark knew by heart. The soft clink of crystal, the low murmur of deals being made over Barolo, the practiced silence of white-gloved waitstaff, it all blended into a familiar symphony that made Chicago's Gold Coast feel almost civilized. Almost. Vivian moved between the linen-draped tables with practiced ease, her dark hair pinned back in a smooth knot, her hostess uniform pressed and spotless. At 24, she'd been greeting millionaires and reading rooms for 2 years, saving every carefully cultivated tip she could squeeze from hedge fund types and real estate kings who barely glanced up from their handshakes. She used every dollar to fund the dream: a studio, a gallery show, an escape from the South Side apartment that smelled like her neighbor's arguments. But there was one guest who always glanced up. Alessandro Moretti arrived every Tuesday and Friday evening at exactly 8 o'clock, sliding into the corner booth, his booth, with the kind of quiet authority that made the entire room subtly rearrange itself around him. Vivian noticed him the first time he walked through the door 6 months ago. Broad-shouldered, dark-haired, dressed in white suits that shouldn't have worked but somehow commanded the room. Neck and knuckles tattooed with ink that told stories she wasn't supposed to ask about. Eyes that didn't miss a single thing. He was the kind of man who made other men nervous just by existing. Vivian had decided, on that very first Tuesday, that the best defense was a good offense. "The usual, Mr. Moretti?" she'd asked, setting down his water with a pointed little smile. "Or are we feeling adventurous tonight?" He'd looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look that cataloged everything, and then, very quietly, the corner of his mouth had moved. Not quite a smile. More like the acknowledgement that a smile existed somewhere in the vicinity. "Scrambled eggs," he'd said. "No adventuring required." It had become their thing. Every Tuesday and Friday Vivian pushed. Alessandro almost smiled. She told herself it was harmless. A little power reclaimed from a man who dripped with it. A private joke in a city that took everything too seriously. She told herself she was perfectly safe. She was wrong about that too. He didn't belong there. That was the first thing anyone noticed about Alessandro Moretti, the way he made every room feel like it had been rearranged without anyone's permission. Moretti's on Michigan Avenue was polished, yes. Expensive linen, amber lighting, Barolo that cost more than Vivian's rent. But Alessandro wore white like a man who had never once worried about getting it dirty. Tonight's suit was immaculate, sharp-shouldered, open at the collar, and against it, the tattoos hit differently. Ink crept up the side of his neck, dark and deliberate, curling toward his jaw like a warning written in a language most people didn't survive long enough to learn. Vivian had learned to read rooms. It was her entire job. And every single person in that dining room, the lawyers, the aldermen, the untouchable wives in their diamond earrings, gave Alessandro Moretti exactly 6 inches of extra space without realizing they were doing it. She gave him none. "Scrambled eggs again?" she asked, setting down his water with the same pointed little smile she'd spent 6 months sharpening specifically for him. Or has the most intimidating man in Chicago finally found something else on the menu worth his attention? He looked at her the way he always did, slow, thorough, like he was checking for exits. Then that almost smile. The one that did something deeply inconvenient to her pulse. "Eggs," he said. "And Vivian." His voice dropped just slightly. "Stop saying my name like that in public." She blinked. In 6 months, he had never used her name. Before she could answer, his phone lit up on the table. He glanced at the screen 1 second, maybe 2, and every trace of warmth drained from his face like someone had pulled a plug. He stood, dropped $400 on the table without counting it. And as he passed her, so close she caught the faint scent of cedar and something colder, he said 6 words so quietly she almost missed them. "Don't be here Friday. Trust me." Then he was gone. And Vivian stood frozen between the tables, $400 fluttering in the draft of the closing door, understanding with sudden, nauseating clarity that she had never once been in control of this game. She was still thinking about those 6 words when Marco pulled her into the break room and closed the door. Marco had worked the floor at Moretti's for 11 years. He had outlasted 3 managers, 2 kitchen fires, and 1 very quiet night when 3 men in suits had walked out of the private dining room and 2 had walked back in. He did not rattle easily. He was rattling now. "Viv." He kept his voice low, his eyes on the door. "What did he say to you?" She told him. Marco's face did something she had never seen it do before. It went completely still. "You know who he is," he said. Not a question. A door swinging open onto something dark. She knew the name. Everyone in Chicago knew the name. Alessandro Moretti, the man the unions didn't argue with, the man 3 aldermen had publicly praised and privately wept over, the man whose father had built half the Gold Coast and whose enemies had a habit of becoming past tense. She knew the name the way you know a storm system on the horizon, abstractly, safely, from a distance. She had been handing him scrambled eggs twice a week for 6 months. "Go home," Marco said. "Don't come back Friday." She went home. He was waiting outside her building. No white suit this time. Dark jacket, hands in his pockets, entirely still in the way of men who have learned that stillness is its own kind of violence. The tattoos disappeared into shadow. Only his eyes caught the streetlight. "I told you not to be here Friday," he said. "It's Thursday," she said, because her mouth had never once known when to stop. Something moved through his expression, not amusement, not quite. Closer to pain. He stepped toward her, and she held her ground, and he stopped close enough that she could see the exact moment his jaw tightened. "They photographed you," he said quietly. "Last Tuesday. You touching my arm when you set down the water. They sent it to me this morning with a message." He paused. "They think you're mine." The street noise seemed to drop away. "Alessandro. If they think you're mine," he said, "they will use you to get to me. And Vivian." His voice went somewhere very flat and very certain. "The things they do to people they use, I will not let that happen to you. Which means you have exactly one choice right now." His eyes held hers. "You either disappear from my life completely, or you disappear into it." He was still waiting for her answer when the black SUV turned slowly onto her street and didn't stop. If you made it this far, you're not just watching, you're part of this story now. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. The SUV had kept driving. Alessandro had watched it go with the practiced calm of a man who measured threats the way other men checked the weather, routinely, without panic, already planning around it. Then he looked back at her and said, simply, "One rule. No more contact. Don't look for me. Don't speak to me. Act like I never existed." She'd agreed. Of course she'd agreed. She was smart enough for that much. Tuesday came anyway. He walked in at 8 o'clock. Same booth. Same white suit. Same ink disappearing into his collar. Same way the room quietly reorganized its gravitational center around him. Vivian felt him arrive the way you feel a change in air pressure, before you see it, before you're ready. She sent someone else to his table. It was the right thing to do. The safe thing. She told herself that 11 times while watching from across the room as a colleague set down his water, and he didn't look up, didn't glance toward her station. Didn't do anything at all except exist in that corner booth like a man who had already accepted her absence. That was somehow worse. She'd spent 6 months being the one person in this building he actually looked at. And now the absence of that, the way he simply didn't look, felt like a door slamming in a house she hadn't realized she lived in. She lasted until Friday. Scrambled eggs. The words were out before she could stop them. Same smile. Same pointed little tilt of her chin. Muscle memory. Treachery. Alessandro looked up slowly. And what she saw in his face was not the almost smile. It was something exhausted and furious, and underneath both of those things, frightened. For her. He was frightened for her, and he was furious that she was making him feel it, and it hit her square in the chest like a fist. He said nothing. Just reached into his jacket, set something on the table between them, and stood. It was a photograph. Her. Last Tuesday night. Walking home alone, lit by the corner store's neon glow, completely unaware. And someone had been close enough to capture the exact tired, distracted expression on her face. "They're not watching me anymore," Alessandro said, his voice barely above a murmur. "They're watching you." She smelled it before she saw it. Vivian had been awake at 2 a.m. the way she always was before a shift, sketchbook open, charcoal on her fingers, the city's orange glow pressing through the curtains. The portfolio was spread across her kitchen table. 3 years of work. Every piece she'd been saving for the gallery show, the one that was supposed to get her out of the South Side, out of this apartment, out of the life that had started to feel like a waiting room for something better. The smoke came under the door first. Then the light wrong, orange, alive, bleeding through the gap like it was looking for her specifically. She grabbed the portfolio before she grabbed her shoes. She would hate herself for that later. The hallway was already gone. A wall of black smoke and roaring heat where the stairwell used to be, so thick and so fast that her mind went blank for a full 3 seconds before the animal part of her brain took over and slammed her back inside. Fire escape. The window. She crossed the apartment in 4 steps and wrenched it open and found steel cable where the ladder should have been, wound tight around the railing, bolted, deliberate. Someone had been here. Someone had done this on purpose, and they had done it knowing she would need that escape, and they had taken it anyway. For stories. The street below swam in and out of focus through the smoke, burning her eyes. Her portfolio was already smoldering at the edges. She pressed it against her chest anyway. Held on like it was a living thing. Like letting go meant admitting that the future she'd sketched inside it was already ash. Then she heard his voice below. Not shouting, Alessandro never shouted. Just her name, once, cutting through the noise like he'd been trained to find her in exactly this kind of chaos. She looked down. He was there, jacket gone, standing directly below her window with his arms up and his eyes locked on hers, and the expression on his face was the one she'd never seen before, raw and open and furious and terrified. All the things he'd spent 6 months keeping immaculate and contained, spilling out at once. "Drop it," he said. "The portfolio. Drop it and jump." She looked at 3 years of her life curling black at the corners. She looked at him. The ceiling behind her cracked like a gunshot. She let go of the portfolio. Watched it tumble, pages scattering like burning birds into the dark. And then she stepped off the ledge. She didn't close her eyes. She wanted to see his face when he caught her, needed to know, in the half-second of free fall, whether the man opening his arms was the one who had almost smiled over scrambled eggs, or the one whose enemies had just burned her future to the ground to send him a message. His arms closed around her hard and sure, and she hit his chest, and they both went down to one knee on the pavement, and he held on, like letting go was not a thing he was capable of anymore. For 10 seconds there was nothing but his heartbeat and the roar of the fire above them and the siren screaming closer. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. and the arms that had just caught her went completely rigid. They didn't do this to warn me, he said, very quietly, to no one in particular. His jaw was tight. His eyes had gone somewhere cold and distant and final. They did this to start something. He looked down at her, still in his arms, her face streaked with smoke and tears she hadn't noticed crying. And for the first time since she'd known him, Alessandro Moretti looked like a man who had run out of ways to keep someone safe from the outside. "We need to go," he said. "Right now." "And Vivian," his voice dropped to almost nothing. "Where we're going, you can't leave. Stay with me until the end, because this story will shock you to the core." Before we begin, don't forget to like this video. Hit subscribe and comment where you're watching from. Now, the safe house didn't look like a safe house. That was probably the point. It looked like a penthouse, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the black shimmer of Lake Michigan, steel and stone, and the kind of brutal, expensive silence that money buys when it stops caring what things look like and starts caring only about what they do. Two men with earpieces were already inside when Alessandro brought her through the door. They didn't look at her. They looked at him, received some wordless instruction, and disappeared. Vivian stood in the center of the room and shook. Not from cold. She hadn't realized until now that her hands hadn't stopped trembling since she'd stepped off the ledge. Alessandro clocked it immediately. He clocked everything and crossed to a cabinet without a word, returning with a glass of something amber that she drank without asking what it was. It burned. It helped. Barely. "My portfolio," she said. It came out smaller than she intended. "I know. 3 years." Her voice cracked on the second word and she hated it, hated that she was cracking in front of him, in front of the man who apparently felt nothing except in brief, devastating flashes. "Every piece I was going to show. Everything I was saving toward. It's gone." "I know." He said it differently this time. Quieter. Like the words cost him something. He sat down across from her, not beside her, not hovering, just lowered himself into the chair opposite with the deliberate care of a man choosing exactly how close to get. His elbows on his knees. His eyes on her face. All of it stripped back, no performance, no careful blankness. Just Alessandro, exhausted and present and finally not hiding behind the almost smile. "I made a mistake," he said. "I thought distance would protect you. That if you stayed away, they'd lose interest and move on to something I actually controlled." He paused. "I was wrong. Distance didn't make you safer. It just made you alone." The words landed somewhere deep and quiet and terrible. "So, what does safe look like now?" she asked. "This." He held her gaze. "You stay. You're seen with me publicly, deliberately. Not as a hostess. Not as a woman who brings me eggs twice a week. As mine." The word was careful, weighted, offered without apology but not without awareness of what it cost her. "My enemies don't touch what's mine. It's the only rule they've never broken. And if I say no? Then I put you on a plane tonight with a new name and enough money to start over somewhere they'll never find you." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "And I spend the rest of my life making sure that's true." Vivian looked at him for a long moment, at the ink on his neck and the exhaustion around his eyes and the careful, furious way he was trying to give her a choice when they both already knew the shape of her answer. "Tell me one thing first," she said. "The photograph. The fire. The people who did this." She stopped. Studied. "Are they coming back?" Something moved through his expression. Not the almost smile. Darker than that. The look of a man who had already decided exactly what was going to happen next and was simply waiting for the world to catch up. "They're already here," he said. And every light in the penthouse went out.